Welcome, old viewers and new viewers, to another episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn all about conflict and its resolution strategies, the what, the why, the when, the where, the who. Evidence-based frameworks are introduced. As an example, my original 5 A's of conflict resolution mnemonics. I also like to introduce those of experts in the field of conflict resolution as well, and other frameworks that may not pertain to conflict resolution, but is salient to the theme of the month or the topic at hand. I like to reserve the third Friday of each month for story time. Story time entails an analysis of a movie, drama, event, as to what went wrong with conflict and how it could have been resolved better. Finally, I like to reserve the last Friday of each month to have a guest. This guest might be an expert in conflict resolution or has something of value to share with all of us as it pertains to the theme of the month. I would like you to come back next week and the last Friday of this month, because story time will look very different from what you're used to. And guest day, the last Friday of this month, will encompass an invitation and a discussion with a panel guest regarding the theme of this month. Yes, the theme of this month is all about the generation gap theory and conflict in the workplace. So before we go into that and before we continue, I would like to wish you all a happy Stampede. You might be like, what does she mean? Albertans will know exactly what I mean. The rest of Canada may or may not know, believe it or not, globally. Pat yourself on the back if you know what I mean by that. So I will talk a little bit about what Stampede is, because the reason is, if you've watched me in the past, or if you know me or work with me professionally, I always emphasize the importance of clarifying a topic, a concept, or a framework, because different parties might use it differently. So it's always good to have a reference point. So when I say happy Stampede, I am not saying, oh, an activity whereby an animal, usually a bull, is let loose to chase people, or people are being trampled upon. That's not what I mean. Stampede is think of it like a festival, a carnival that originated from the wild, wild west. So yes, my attire, my bandana is my piece of clothing commemorating Stampede. But I will share you a picture just for those of you who might be interested, just be like, that's interesting. So what does it entail? So Stampede, like I mentioned, so the Wild Wild West, so think of the rodeo, absolutely. In addition to thinking about the rodeo, young and old, let your head down. And it could be up or down, depending on the texture of your natural hair. The Western clothing, so it could be cowboy or cowgirl hats, cow boots, denim of some sort. You might have those fancy buckles, and usually turquoise or different colors. So over the years, the fashion has evolved, but usually you see quite a lot of plaid. I am not wearing plaid because it's extremely hot right now in Calgary. When I last checked, it was 29 degrees centigrade. So I am hot. So if you see me fanning myself with this, pardon me, okay? But yeah, so Stampede. So you have the fairs, you have a special show at nighttime, which is called the Grandstand Show. So it's lots of lights, lots of dancing. Sometimes international guests are invited to participate with a Grandstand Show. It ends when it's darker with different fireworks. And yes, the rodeo, the chalk wagon races, the food, oh my goodness, exotic food. Last time I remember, maybe about 2 years ago or so, believe it or not, we had some interesting food like scorpions on pizza. Yeah, I know some people may like that, some may not like that. But that's the Stampede in Calgary. And lots of country dancing, Stampede breakfast. Shout out to my car dealership that did a splendid job of organizing a Stampede breakfast with good food, live country music. And the atmosphere was just lovely. We were underneath a tent, so we were not hot. We had good conversation, met new people. Well done to all of you guys. So on that note, I will stop sharing my screen and we will return to the topic at hand today. So if you've not watched the previous episode, I highly recommend that you watch it. Why? Because we will be continuing from last time. So last time we talked about an intro to what the generation gap theory is all about. And we talked about specifically the characteristics and motivators for generations that belong to the traditionally, sometimes called the silent generation, and the baby boomers. Now we will be talking today and concluding this series by talking about the X, Y, and Z generations. Some of you might be, why is she saying Z? Depending on where you grew up, what English, whether it's Queen's English that you learned in terms of reading and spelling and pronunciation, that's when you might hear the word Z. And that's the system I kind of grew up in. So hence Z. Canada accepts both Z and Z. So that's what that's all about. Now, I'd like you to reflect on something. Reflect on an instance, either in the workplace or in your personal life, where for some reason you just had a hard time getting through to someone of a different generation. What did you do differently when you noticed this? Was there an epiphany? Reflect on that. So now we're going to talk, like I mentioned, we're going to focus particularly on generation X, Y, and Z now, or Z. Woo, that's weird that I said Z. I've never said that in a long time. Generation Z. So I'm going to share my screen again. And the reason is I'm just going to show the table to you as it pertains to the cutoff years. And again, depending on what author you refer to, you might notice the different cutoff years are a little bit different. So generation X, Y, and Z. Last time we talked about the history, about why they're called what they're called. But now let's look at the composition of these particular generations. So when you look at this table, from the very bottom is the traditionalist. And as you go higher, you're going to notice that. So basically, you're going to have, sorry about that. Yeah, so here we go. So generation X and Y. So over here is traditionalist, baby boomers. Here are the X, Y, and Z. Generation X, depending on what author you choose, you can see that the cutoff years are slightly different. So again, if someone says it belongs to a certain generation, I would say just accept what they tell you. However, if it comes to a case whereby you really need to know the intricacies of things, depending on how comfortable the individual might be, and in the workplace, this might be tricky because when we talk about age being a protected ground, human rights grounds, because sometimes we might discriminate against one, you may not really want to reveal that. So just be careful with that aspect of asking people things, okay? So maybe just say, okay, I belong to the baby boomers, just say what it is, depending on the comfort level of you and that employee, right? So generation X, Y, and Z. So I did figure out why generation Z sometimes are called the iGen, and it has to do with, in 2007, that's when the iPod, like the iPhone, was introduced. So this generation are notorious, are known for, in a positive and perhaps not so positive way, of being extremely smartphone savvy and techno savvy as well. Okay. Now, compositions. Let's talk real quick about the compositions. So when we talk about the X, Y, and Z, it's very important to know what motivates them. And when I talk about what motivates them, it's very important to know as well what's the composition in the workplace. So for example, Generation X, they comprise about 33% according to this research, which is Purdue University Global 2022. Generation X comprise about 33% of the workforce of the area where they were studying in the United States. What are the characteristics? They are all about promotion-based competence, not based on seniority. And right there, that makes you think, right? In most union collective agreements, it's all about seniority, right? Well, Generation X may not necessarily like that according to this resource, okay? They also value autonomy. And some of their motivators are they like work-life balance, recognition from bosses, stocks, and bonuses. And then when you talk about the millennials, they comprise about 35% of the workforce. They value culture. Now let's talk a little bit about that. When we talk about culture, not necessarily one's ethnic cultural background, but in terms of the culture of the day, the culture of the city, the culture of economics, politics, and so forth, interpersonal relationship, that kind of culture, not so much the traditions you grew up with and things like that. So you could say the culture of fashion, culture of workplace style, I guess, open space, just open office concept, just things like that come to mind. For example, some of the motivators for them, they love flexible time off, immediate feedback from their supervisors or from colleagues. And in terms of non-monetary, they like stock. That's an incentive and a motivator for them, okay? So think about that when you're planning your workforce development, your workforce pool, what are ways you can attract to retain, and what in terms of recruitment and retainment. So keeping that in mind, that's very helpful. And then last but not least, you have Generation Z, which comprise about 5% of the workforce. The characteristics, they value face-to-face interaction, they like structure, clear directions. Motivators, constant feedback is something that they really cherish. Mentorship is something of importance for them. And last but not least, flexible schedule. So keeping in mind that Generation Z are usually those not quite over the age of 25, right? So specifically, you can say those who were born 1997 or later, or some resources said between 1995 and 2012. Okay. Now we've talked a little bit about that. I want us to envision a scenario. We painted a different scenario in the previous episode. Now we're going to tweak it a little bit with slight variations. So envision this, a case study here. A group of virtual remote workers are summoned back to the workplace. These workers are employees, they're in a non-managerial position. They specifically belong to the generation Y and Z. This summon has caused angst and conflict in the workplace amongst them. Okay, so how would you resolve this conflict? Ponder over that. And while you're pondering over that, I want to share some of the strengths and weaknesses of Generation X and Y. This resource I'm going to share, unfortunately, does not showcase Generation Z, but we will proceed and have a look as to what it does share in terms of comparison between X, Y, and the baby boomers, okay? So for Generation X, which are represented by the lady in the red, so when it comes to executive presence, they definitely fall behind as compared to the baby boomers, 28% according to this resource. They're more technically savvy than the baby boomers. I'm sorry, this is interesting. According to this resource, it says 18%, which is interesting, more technically savvy than the millennials, which actually surprises me. And in terms of generating revenue, they exceed baby boomers and millennials. Similarly with relation building, they flourish in that regards. They excel in that regards. They are very good at being adaptable as compared to baby boomers and millennials. They're excellent in problem solving. Again, they're ahead as compared to baby boomers and Generation X, which is surprising because I would have thought the baby boomers would be ahead in this respect. Generation X are not as cost effective as the baby boomers, which could make sense. And in terms of collaboration, they lead in collaboration as compared to the millennials and Generation X. Sorry, as compared to Generation Millennials and baby boomers. Now, again, we do not know how they compare with Generation Z. Now, like I have said before in the past, there are always exceptions to the rules. So this is a framework to guide us, to give us some insight, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone that belongs to a particular generation will demonstrate these characteristics, strengths, or weakness, okay? So it's very important that we're clear about that. Now, let's have a little chat now about that case study I mentioned earlier. How would you resolve that problem whereby this angst, conflict that's appearing to look like to spiral down to destructive conflict because Gen Ys and Z that were working remotely do not want to come back to work face to face? How would you resolve it? So keeping in mind, I would recommend again having a chart that has a different generations, their different characteristics, motivators, strengths, and weaknesses, okay? This template can be provided to all employees, either in an orientation package, accessible in a common room if you're meeting face-to-face, physical location, or access in a particular folder if they can access information virtually as well, okay? That again gives you a guide, a template of what to keep in mind when you're trying to negotiate with them, if it has to come to a negotiation process. Again, I did mention earlier, we have to be careful with that in terms of maybe some individuals may not be happy, they might feel they might get discriminated based on age, but again, weigh the risk-benefit ratio of doing this, okay? I would definitely summon a team meeting, face-to-face preferably, but if we cannot be face-to-face, it could be virtual, but definitely a team meeting to have a group discussion about what's happening here, okay? I will have a one-on-one, verify what I'm hearing with each individual employee that's affected. I would consult HR if there's an HR department, but believe it or not, some organizations do not have an HR department, okay? So in that case, you might be like, okay, how do I ensure we're not breaching any employment or labor laws? You can still consult externally with an organization that maybe has an HR department. You can look to the laws of your province or state or land as it pertains to labor laws to ensure that you're not breaching anything with any suggestion or negotiation that happens. I'll definitely, like I say, tailor individual needs to the employee. Now you have to weigh the risk-benefit ratio. So now that we know that generation Y and Z specifically enjoy flexible time off, what does that tell you for some organizations where there's shift work or whereby it's easier to have a full-time status, okay, 1 FTE? Well, these individuals, from what I've heard, from what the research is saying, they do not want that 1 FTE status. They might like 0.7, 0.5. So how can you negotiate? How can you meet them halfway? So some might say, well, that's why we shouldn't hire the younger ones. We should hire the older ones. When I say older ones, maybe those belonging to the baby boomers or Generation X. They understand the value of, when I say value, let me be hesitant again. I don't want to make generalizations here, but my point is they don't mind working full-time hours, but what's going to prop up, as you would see, is that they would cost more. So from a budgetary standpoint, what budget do you have for your particular department to meet the needs of the operations, to meet the needs of the clients that you serve, again, depending on what setting you work in? How can you tweak your staff pool, the scheduling to meet the needs of these individuals? Because what's the worst case scenario? They're going to leave, because some of them were threatening or saying they were going to leave, change jobs. So you have to weigh the risk benefit ratios of tweaking your schedules, full-time hour status, and so on and so forth. Plus, maybe if you cannot tweak that, what incentive and bonuses can you add for them? They like mentorship. So how can you incorporate mentorship? What does that mean to them? Does your definition of mentorship differ from what their perception of mentorship? So having that conversation, okay? Now, team building activities. So at that meeting that you have a team, preferably face-to-face, coming together to discuss this, I will suggest having a team building activity that entails incorporating the generation gaps theory across the different generations. So again, you can have the traditionalists or the baby boomers teach skills like maybe ballroom dancing, etiquette. You can have the millennials and the Generation Z teach the X and Y about being technical savvy. Traditionalists or baby boomers can talk about idioms. You'd be like, idioms? Why idioms? I'm partial. I like idioms. I think idioms can basically convey a picture in 1 or 2 sentences instead of going to a whole narration of words, a whole litany of words, if you will, right? So yeah, a stitch in time makes 9. Prevention is better than cure. All those idioms and proverbs, you can incorporate it, have a competition, see who wins. Again, it's a generalization. What I am seeing from my experience, people of my generation don't necessarily use idioms. So you might be like, why am I using idioms? Well, I grew up in a setting whereby idioms were widely used. I read broadly, my schooling, and so forth. So now I pause there. Some of you are like, her generation, what exactly is Dr. Cheryl's generation? What generation does she fall under? Excellent question. I actually straddle between generation X and Y, and my characteristics and motivators are similar for both. So yes, hint, 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 I can speak to generations before me and after me. I'm that nice liaison consultant that can understand different perspectives there, okay? And I work the same way as well. So by having such a team building activity as that generation gap theory across the generations, believe it or not, it might end up serving like a reverse psychology. It might have a reverse psychological effect whereby the Gen Ys and Zs will be like, wait a minute, I didn't know we could have done this, or this could have been done. It will be an epiphany and aha moment, potentially, okay? So, call to action. I know this was really quick, but still, we still have a little bit to explore under this call to action. So my call to action is this, asking you a question. How can you incorporate generation X, Y, and Z in the workplace? Think outside the box. If you have to go to various industries, go to various industries to get hints and solutions, invite them to your team meetings, different generations of different industries. That creates a spark in team meetings, something different from the norm. Human beings need to be stimulated mentally and intellectually, right? So something a little bit different, unexpected, but yet adds value in one shape or form, okay? Now, on that note, a second call to action relates to, I'm gonna give you a riddle, two riddles. So at the very beginning, I commended my car dealership for putting on an excellent Stampede breakfast. I did not tell you what my car dealership is, and that was on purpose. I want you to do an activity. So this is your call to action, and you will see the win-win with it. I invite you to go back and view my earlier episodes. I believe the one that is relevant to what I'm talking about right now is the one, it might be episode number 2, Aids to Assess. And I provided a quality improvement tool of asking the whys, the 5 whys. The creator of that tool originally, I mentioned the individual's name, and I also mentioned a car brand. So go watch that clip, find out the car brands right there. That gives a hint as to the brands at my car dealership. You'll be like, well, we don't know which specific dealership you deal with. Well, let's put it this way. I reside in the northwest of Calgary, the far northwest of Calgary, and the name of this dealership has 2 male names. CG, that's all I'll give you. So I invite you to research, go back to my episode about the 5 whys, find out what the brand of my car is and the dealership. Why? If you get the answer right, I invite you to email me or go to my website and contact me. I could give you a discount of one of my services that I offer. Now, the second riddle I'm going to provide here is, I love to dance. So I haven't been to my regular dance place in over 2.5 years, and I went last Friday after the show. And oh my goodness, it was so amazing. The endorphins, the smile. I was like, oh, how did I last this long? So I want to commend them. This is a facility that I've been going to for years. They do a splendid job, nice environment, nice people, both in terms of the owners and the people that gather there. So it's ballroom and Latin. So can you see the theme here? I love to dance. After all, the title of my show is called The Dancing Negotiator, which is a play on words because the art of negotiation is like a dance. So nevertheless, here's the other riddle for you to potentially get a discount for one of my services. So I like to dance. Listen very carefully because I'm giving you the hint of the name of where I like to go dance. But you need to figure out where exactly the name is based on 2 sentences I'm going to read right now. I like to dance. Dancing is like a sport. You know what province I reside in. Research it. So it's a 3-letter words, almost like charades, 3-letter words of this location of where I like to dance. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to fan myself a little bit because I'm beginning to sweat here. Okay. So figure it out. 2 things. Figure it out my car dealership, where I like to dance. And if for each one you get right, I'll give a discount for one service. If you get both of them right, I'll give you 2 discounts. Okay. And then I would like to thank Win-Win Women. Win-Win Women is a global women movement. It is through them that I'm here on this platform to reach you, to empower you to deal with conflict, to enhance organizational productivity, whatever industry you belong to. Yes, I tend to lean towards healthcare because that's my background, but the principles apply across. Win-Win Women, I mentioned, it's a global movement. It's all about caring, connecting, and collaborating. It's much more than just a show host like myself. It's much more than just a network. So I invite you to go visit their website, winwinwomen.com, see what it's all about, okay? And also, even a step further, visit the various shows. You might glean a thing or two either for yourself, your workplace, or for your family, okay? So I invite you to do that. Now, finally, before I show you a little bit about the services that I offer, see if you can guess the answer to this. Who said, "If music be the food of love, play on"? If you said Duke Orsino, well done, but the author was Shakespeare. So well done, well done, well done. So now you can quote me with what I'm about to say. If movement makes your heart soar, dance on, okay? Find that one thing or few things that makes your heart soar and do it, okay? So on that note, I am going to share my screen for you to see the different services that I offer. And with that special incentive or call to action, what discounts can you have? So as I share my screen here, so I'm a healthcare administration consultant. So if you need assistance as it pertains to anything to do with strategic management, for instance. So high-level things, the strategic direction of your organization, either an existing or one you plan to do, I can help you create that. Anything to do with quality improvement, risk management, change management. So for example, when we talk about the scenario of the conflict and the angst in the workplace, change management will be one of the services that I offer, and the fees for any one of these services you can find on my website, which is www.shalloweagleswings.com. I'm also a certified hybrid coach for the Canadian International Institute for Applied Negotiation. So I provide conflict services and I can help with personal coaching and mentorship with that. I review policies and governance materials, the subject matter experts for different education materials as well. So if you need assistance with any one of the services, don't hesitate to contact me. And remember, you can get a discount if you get any one of those 2 or both of those riddles I gave you correct. So on that note, I invite you to join me next time, same place, for another episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. Remember, next week is actually story time, and story time is going to be very different from anything you've experienced on this show. You can actually bring the whole family. Yes, bring your popcorn, your wings, your drinks. It's going to be quite special. It will be story time, all right, but a collage of different interesting stories. That's all I'll tell you. Movies, actually. Now, before you leave, remember that you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. Goodbye, and have a splendid day.